Our next speaker is Barbara Henry. She is the proprietor of Harsimus Press, printing an eclectic variety of illustrated fine editions and chapbooks. Her interests include the vagaries of the English language and the Roman alphabet. She discovered letterpress at the University of Iowa, studying with Kay Amert. After moving to New York City, she worked as the jobbing printer of the South Street Seaport Museum's Bowne & Company stationers, where she was curator for over 20 years, producing 6 editions for the museum, beginning with a Specimen Book of Bowne's collection of 19th century types. She began Harsimus Press in the late 1980s. Her books are in collections at the Morgan Library, Columbia University's Butler Library, Rutgers Alexander Library, the University of Pennsylvania, Swarthmore College, the Library of Congress, and others, as well as many private collections. She teaches occasionally at the Center for Book Arts in Manhattan and works in her shop in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Everybody, please welcome Barbara Henry.
Hello.
Hello, Barbara. How are you?
I'm trying to figure out how to get my screen here on. There it is. Okay, that I will do. So I'm going to start, and I actually feel like my introduction is an extension of the of Melanie's talk, because I just wanted to point out that the thing about making books is that it requires a lot of different skills: text or content, paper or whatever, type and printing, illustration or decoration or not, pacing and decoration and organization, which you can call design, and finally binding. And it's difficult to master all these skills, although it's certainly been done by exceptional individuals, and I would count Melanie amongst them. More often, it is with the help of multiple craftspeople that books are made. These people may be turned to again and again and become friends, partners, or permanent collaborators, especially for me, if they are women, because I happen to be one, and it's comfortable to work with other women. But the work itself is separate for my purposes here from any consideration of gender. The 3 artists whose work I want to talk about and show to you today, Rosaire Appel, Ruth Lingen, and Barbara Mauriello, to put them in alphabetic order, are exceptional craftspeople and original thinkers. They have different skills. One is a bookbinder, one's a printer paper maker, and one works in digital media. I have longstanding working relationships with all of them, and I'm a great admirer of their work. There are many women working in the book arts today, and many whose work I admire. These 3 are different enough from each other, have different skills than I do, and can be made to represent the community in microcosm. So now I need to share my screen, which is right there. Rosaire's work appeals to me on a material level as a synthesis of opposites. And here she is in her studio. Digital technology in the service of handmade marks and a search for meaning in an abstract language. Her myriad publications are inexpensive print-on-demand books or one-of-a-kind sequences of asemic drawings, sometimes on transparent pages, that increasingly focus on sound as a subject. She began as a writer, having published 2 experimental novels in the 1970s. I first became acquainted with her work when she spoke at the Book Arts Symposium at Rutgers University almost 10 years ago. Even then, she had completed a great pile of books, and the one that stood out for me was 2 Trains, which was done in 2011. This is a braided narrative of 2 free-flowing self-referential sentences that burst on separate tracks across a field of dynamic abstract marks, like trains in a landscape, or like 2 trains of thought. It is presented in a landscape format in simple black and white pages that evoke a children's book. You are reminded that reading is like traveling, with varying speeds and levels of distraction, traveling in time across pages. The 2 trains of thought are rendered in separate fonts, and they wander or flowed across the pages to remind you of your task as reader. Occasionally, the writer intrudes to make sure you are paying attention. So the vehicle and the main character is the sentence, the two sentences that form the narrative. It's a book about reading, but it reads like a song, a musical polyphony. Rosaire's influences include graphic novels and comics, and yet, from 2012, is formatted like a graphic novel, using Venday dots to create fields for heavier black marks that form landscape-like designs that show the influence of Japanese prints. There are pages of abstract language and a spread that seems like a polyglot of 5 Asemic alphabets. At one point, the book turns itself inside out and the speech balloons carry the images until order is restored and the marks return to their usual places. There's a lot of visual excitement, burst boundaries and dot distortions. There are no words. In Morpheme Pages from 2008, a gridded dictionary of Asemic characters or words, she includes a short essay entitled Chairs and Pigeons, which concludes, "These are not private, incommunicable, unsignifiable, non-suggestive, incomprehensible gestures. Visual linguistics are a shared trait. You see a chair in a cloud, I see a chair. We communicate. Yet it doesn't mean there's a chair in the cloud. You see a chair, I see a pigeon. Still, there's nothing to argue over. A cloud is still a cloud. Its form is ordinarily wordless." And in Provisional Spaces from 2019, a book about thinking, she notes, "A sentence is a punishment, and words, like worms, tunnel under it all." Rosaire's work has been trending toward the depiction of sound, as if the abstract mark making is forcing her back beyond language. She has drawn abstract musical scores. In 2012, she published a collection of sea songs, and sea is spelled S-E-E, which has inspired musicians to interpret and record her drawings. Rosaire takes inspiration from her materials, and this book featured a 5-pronged pen that produced a musical stave, which she marks with notes or uses on its own to suggest the sounds. The book begins with the epigraph, "When the eye listens, the mind sings," and runs to 184 pages. Recently, in 2020, she published Corona Panic Score, a large format musical representation of the anxiety and fear of the present pandemic. 2019's projection lamp catalog, inspired by an industrial catalog of that name, turns the engineering diagrams of light fixtures into representations of sound, showing their basic similarity as waves in the fundamental laws of physics, while at the same time rendering complex diagrams senseless, as if perceived by someone like me, for whom their meaning is impenetrable. In 2014, I published a small anthology entitled Fit to Print with 3 artists, myself, Rosaire, and Amanda Deutsch, who took inspiration from the New York Times. Rosaire contributed the frontispiece and a double-page spread of marks taken from the financial pages. Amanda and I contributed poems that used text from the paper. Each artist was allowed 3 pages. It was my first experience working with Rosaire, and afterward, I wanted to meet her on her own ground as I had met her on mine. We began tossing around ideas for a digital project. Since then, we have collaborated on 2 print-on-demand books, Axe and Ox, there's the inside, which was 2017, and Beyond Question in 2019. We produced small editions of letterpress book jackets for these. Many of Rosaire's books are available from Amazon or on her own website. Her husband, Robert Ellison, recently donated his large collection of art pottery to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It was exhibited this summer as shapes from out of nowhere. He died soon after the show opened, and Rosaire continues to work amid a substantial number of these spectacular objects. Her work is often exhibited and is featured in the book Asemic, The Art of Writing by Peter Schwanger, published by the University of Minnesota Press in 2019. She lives and works in Manhattan's Greenwich Village. Barbara Mauriello. I first met Barbara Mauriello as a teacher. Fresh out of graduate school, I signed up for beginning bookbinding at the Center for Book Arts. I later learned with some astonishment it was one of the first classes she had taught. Barbara was rigorous, demanding, and very good at explaining. I was impressed. She was also friendly, and since we both lived in Jersey City, there's her shelf of models. We began to commute together in the evenings on the PATH train. The center was at that time located near the Bowery, and it was a dicey neighborhood. There were a lot of drunks. It did seem like a good idea to band together after dark when heading home. This developed into a lasting friendship and working partnership. Barbara was one of a small group of apprentices at the Center for Book Arts in the early 1980s. At the same time, she worked as an assistant to Hetty Kyle at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. Her first book project, a paper quilt, a collaged book with a non-adhesive binding, was exhibited in the Hamptons and immediately sold, which she found encouraging. As a binder, she is known for her boxes. When I asked her which of her many projects was a favorite, she cited Women of the Bible, Abigail to the Queen of Sheba, a carefully crafted box containing 16 cubes with portraits of the women containing their stories folded in accordions inside. This was inspired by a gift of a bag full of pieces of a ruined 18th century printed book. Barbara takes her inspiration often from her materials, and color has always been central to her process. A book for Hilma, Swiftly and Surely, which was completed in 2018, was inspired by a catalog she found long before the Guggenheim exhibit of the painter Hilma af Klint's work. It is a two-sided accordion on Fabriano Roma paper, filled with looping automatic writing and pochoir illustrations, produced in an edition of 4 copies. I did what little printing was involved. The book is a beautiful and thoughtful tribute to the artist that inspired her, who worked, in her own words, swiftly and surely, without changing a single brushstroke. We have often traded skills or hired each other. She helps me with binding, I help her with printing. This is her O Paris from 2011 by Apollinaire, a boxed board game celebrating 4 lines from Apollinaire's poem. I printed the text on rectangular sheets of Mariki paper per her instructions. She then cut them into triangles to be configured by the reader in many different ways. I printed pamphlet binding in a paper wrapper after she gave me a sheet of directions that she had written for the binding that just seemed to need to be turned into a book. We have also published collaborative books under the imprint Grandin Street Books. Our official collaborations, and these are truly books that neither of us could or would have done on our own, began with 26 Rooms, 2004. Together, we taught ourselves the technique of pochoir, which is painting through stencils, and was used extensively in 19th century Paris for fashion plates and patterning. The book consists of an elaborate box shaped like a house, and each of the 4 copies in the edition are uniquely decorated. Inside the doors to the box are 2 containers of a set of 13 folios each. The idea was to create repeating patterns like wallpaper. We began with the famous quote of Oscar Wilde's last words, "Either that wallpaper goes or I do." Each folio begins with a printed doorknob and opens to a spread of printed pattern. We developed the ideas together and the patterns independently and paired the stencils and painted the stencils together in Barbara's studio. These are her work. We have done 6 books together so far. For Object Stein in 2007, we cut linoleum to create a wordless story inspired by Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons. It's a 2-sided accordion, and Barbara made a folding box closed with a button to house it. Something Sorrow Has Made from 2010 was a response to the poems of Hazel Hall, a young invalid from Portland, Oregon, who wrote about her work as a seamstress. Barbara devised a concertina binding that allowed us to envelope each poem, printed on brightly colored paper and decorated with a pochoir image, in a gray folder embroidered with simple stitches that represents the 4 gray walls that define the poet's life. There's the poem. And finally, Color Plates in 2015 presents recipes by Nancy Jessup with pochoir illustrations in folios housed in a decorated paper box. Barbara Mauriello's studio is in Hoboken, New Jersey. You can see more examples of her work on her website, www.barbaramauriello.com. Her book, Making Memory Boxes, was published in 2000 by Rockport Publishers. Ruth Lingen. My relationship with Ruth Lingen began when I hired her to work at Bowne & Company Stationers, part of the South Street Seaport Museum in Manhattan in the mid-1980s. She was new to the city, a native of South Dakota and a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, where she studied with Walter Hamady. She had had some part-time jobs in the city, notably working with Louise Nevelson on an edition of 250 cast paper pieces, but she needed a reliable source of income, albeit 4 days a week at a minimum wage, and I quickly realized how lucky I was to have her. She worked with Joe Wilfer at Pace on the day she was not at Bowne. She was a skillful compositor and designer. That's another shot of her studio. As well as a paper maker, and required little oversight. She single-handedly produced an edition of a 19th century children's book for the museum entitled Peter Parley's Visit to the City of New York. We had a large collection of 19th century display types, and the aim was to recreate the book in the style of the period using the type that we had, not to reproduce the book exactly. She soon was offered a permanent job at Pace Paper, so I lost her, but we have remained friends, and now I've sometimes worked for her. Ruth has worked closely with many well-known artists such as Chuck Close, Jim Dine, Kiki Smith, Leonardo Drew, Shepard Fairey, James Sienna, Robert Ryman, and others. When I asked her what was her favorite project to date, she said, Led Almost by My Tie, a collaboration with the poet Jeremy Sigler and the painter-sculptor Jessica Stockholder, and published under Ruth's imprint Picture Books in 2006. The deluxe edition of this book is housed in a wall-mounted plastic box. There it is. And the materials for the book were carefully chosen by Ruth to stimulate the artists, including some handmade plastic paper by Jean Tatin in Paris. Ruth is a master collaborator. The book went through multiple design dummies, and the 3 artists had monthly meetings to discuss ideas over a period of 2 years. The prints involve handset type with lithography, transfer, digital, collage, and hand coloring. The poet, as poets do, kept changing the poems. Ruth likes to give artists a lot of leeway to see what happens. The book fuses radical materials. Ruth's description of the book is super physical, and radical content, and it's a lot of fun to go through. Ruth is completely fearless, and when a collaborator wants to do something difficult, she doesn't flinch and she makes it happen. As Ruth expressed it, a collaboration is fluid, open to go which way the wind blows. In Spite of Everything, The Stars is a more conventional book featuring 9 poems by Edward Hirsch and 8 soft ground and aquatint etchings by Glenn Goldberg, printed by Julia DeMario in 2007 as individual prints. Ruth secured permission to use them in a book. Color was added by pochoir by Ruth and John Bartlett, and the book was published in 2012 under Ruth's imprint Picture Books. She searched a long time for a suitable text to accompany the plates before discovering Hirsch's poems. The poems describe the changing seasons and the changing light as day fades to night. Ruth set the text in Stevenson Blake's Modern No. 20 and Law Italic. The book, like most of her editions, was bound by Mark Tomlinson. My name is in the colophon for helping with the pochoir end sheets, for which I cut the stencils, punching a million little round holes to Ruth's pattern. She has had a long-standing collaborative relationship with the painter-printmaker Jim Dine. She has spent summers in Walla Walla, Washington, where Dine lives, since 2007, working with him on various projects. Their first project was Kali, who's the goddess of destruction, in 1999. It was published jointly by Whitman College in Walla Walla and Swarthmore Press in London, and incorporates Dine's poetry, Ruth's letterpress, and Dine's intaglio plates printed by Julia DeMario. Jewish Fate, combining Ruth's letterpress and Dine's poetry and lithographs printed by Nina Dine, the artist's granddaughter, was published in 2016. She's currently involved in a project that entails 60 multicolored botanical prints with intaglio and lithography that put together measures 6 by 9 feet. This is the 6th project they will have done together. The original concept was for a book with one of Dine's poems. The pandemic complicated the project, and Dine had it published offset by Steidl in Germany. Now they are working to incorporate the original hand-printed plates into 5 unique books with the working title Opus. And I have more of Jewish Fate here. They're all tools. Ruth works in her shop in Brooklyn called Line Press Limited with Nina Dine, where she collaborates with artists to produce limited edition prints and letterpress books. Thank you very much.
Just letting everybody know that we will again be introducing questions regarding Barbara's talk. Richard had a question. Oh, there we go. Beautiful.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Richard.
Am I clear? I just wanted to ask Rosaire Appel. I think Barbara Henry mentioned her press name. I'm not certain, but I know I missed it if she did. Barbara, could you please repeat Rosaire's Appel press name?
It's called Press Rappel.
Okay, Rappel, I guess.
Yes.
I saw the sign on the back. Okay, I did. Good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And again, these are available on Amazon, a lot of them, or on her own website.
Really? Okay, I'll look. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Rappel says, really enjoyed it, Barbara.
Thank you, because it's terrifying to talk about someone you know might be listening.
There you go.
Barbara, it was just fascinating to hear you talk about my work in a third person point of view. It really was. I mean, it's a rare experience. I just was fascinated by what you said about all of us, about all of our work. I just, it was a really nice presentation. And I like being able to see the books and hear the backstories, and I just, really nice. Yeah.
Thank you. It seemed important to me when I was asked to do this to talk about the present time rather than historical figures. For one thing, because women in the book arts is really happening right now. There are a lot of us.
Yeah.
So we don't always get the attention that we need.
But it's just, this whole thing, it's just wonderful to see examples of of things that are being done and so many different approaches. It's just, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I was kind of stunned by the first presentation today too.
So we have some time left. If people have any more questions for Barbara. Oh, okay.
Barbara, what are you working on now?
I'm working on more books inspired by 19th century primers.
Wow. Okay.
I found a couple more. Pennsylvania is a treasure trove of 19th century primers.
Of course.
And antique stores and flea markets.
Would any of these happen to be in the preliminary stages of possibly being on the virtual Oak Knoll Fest website?
None of them. The only one I finished was in such a small edition that I didn't put it in. But I'm hoping to make a bigger book eventually. What I like the simplicity of language of beginning readers, but also because English is so strange. I just did a book, there was a list of misspelled words at the back of a primer, which were homophones, or words that sound the same but are spelled differently. So you could say the boat is for sale, or, you know, we want to sail the boat. Those words, I turned them into a kind of a narrative, very, very short little narrative. And just the amount of confusion that could happen in trying to master English, even as like a child or as a foreign speaker, is just incomprehensible to me. So I find that really stimulating.
It was also fun to read that, you know, because it's so confusing. It's so confusing. You're thinking that the definitions is one thing, but the spelling is another thing. It's delightful.
I know, and there's you know, many languages you just can't do that with them.
Yeah.
English is very flexible. We're very lucky to have English.
I agree.
And we're very lucky not to have had to learn it as a second language too.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Barbara. Really appreciate it.